I will go ahead and jump in as people are still trickling in. Thank you all for joining us today for one of our Career Pathway series, Fostering Men of Color in Education. Just a quick introduction. My name is Robert Humphrey, and I'm currently a recruiter with City Year based in Detroit. Just a little bit about me. Prior to this, I actually was a teacher in the Detroit public school system. I was a middle school teacher, specifically a language arts teacher for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Did that for a couple of years, and it was one of the most exciting, eventful roller coaster experiences of my life that has changed me forever. And so I'm really passionate about this topic of men of color in education, and I was really happy that we're able to have this series today and this discussion on a topic that I think is just really, really important. When I was a teacher, the school that I taught in, for some context, had 3 men of color teachers that were in it, me being one of them. And I will say, in that moment, I consider that an anomaly in terms of how many men of color there were in that particular school, because usually you don't see many at all. And so just from a personal perspective, saying that 3 men of color in a full K-8 school is kind of a lot, I think already gives a level of perspective on the necessity for the conversation that we are going to be having today. So I'm going to kind of start us off by giving a little bit of an introduction into what City Year is and why we do what we do, and kind of the importance of this event and why we thought it would be important for us to talk about. So at City Year, we really believe in fostering spaces for conversation on difficult topics. And it is sort of through sharing our life experiences and discussing these tough topics that as a community, we're able to come together, find solutions, and learn from one another. I kind of like to describe City Year, our mission being social justice through educational equity. There's always a few different ways you can kind of think of the importance of the work that we do, but I kind of like to, if I have to shrink it down to a phrase, I like to say social justice through educational equity is at the core of what we do and why we do what we do. So by no means on the conversations that we're going to have today do we claim to be experts on the topics of bias or equity, and I kind of want to give that disclaimer before we jump in. But we are, we, as part of our commitment to our community, we do, like I said earlier, want to facilitate conversations, even though we may not be experts on this. But the importance of doing so is to provide the opportunity to foster equity, not just education broadly, but also in our own lives and in the schools where we serve. So why are we here today specifically to kind of talk about this topic? So I want to give a little bit of background. 4% of school districts in the country produce over 50% of non-high school graduates. I'm going to pause and I want to say that one more time just to let that statistic sink in. 4% of school districts in the country produce over 50% of non-high school graduates. So like Detroit, these districts predominantly serve Black and Latinx students. And if we want to look at some research, research has taught us that when students had a teacher of the same race as them, they reported feeling more cared for and more motivated by that teacher, and also more confident in the quality of student-teacher communication. These very same students also often reported more interest in the schoolwork that they did, and also higher college aspirations. And we know that education is pretty much the great equalizer, as we always say. So that's really important when we break down those statistics and figure out what can we do to address some of these systemic issues at the core of kind of contributing to that education gap. So, this is really where racial equity and educational equity intersect with each other. And this is one of the challenges that City Year seeks to address. So I kind of, with some of that background in mind, I want to go ahead and jump into the meat and potatoes of our conversation today, for the sake of time and kind of just really to get into why we are here. Before we kind of get into like the roundtable discussion of it all, I want to give our two panelists a time to introduce themselves. So Rudy and Latrell, if you could provide your name, your connection to City of Detroit, your current position, and what do you feel like gives you a unique perspective on this topic? So just as a general means of introducing you all to the crowd. So Rudy, could we start with you, please?
Awesome. First, I want to really thank City Year for inviting me to have this very, critical conversation. I mean, this is, something that's been near and dear to my heart for a long time. But before I get to, the connection and why I think this is important, I do want to give you a little bit of background about myself. I'm Rudy Hobbs. I am a City Year board member. I've been a board member since, I want to say 2015 or so. So it's been some time. I really kind of seen City Year start from here and grow, to have this really outsized, influence in education in Detroit, which I'm really, really proud of. By trade, I'm a lobbyist now. But before I became a lobbyist, I had a long career in public service. And that public service started in Detroit Public Schools, my first year teaching in 1999. I was a first grade teacher, or actually a second grade teacher when I first came out of school. And I've taught every grade from first grade, second grade to fifth grade, in elementary. And I thought I was going to be a superintendent one day, but really kind of got very passionate about politics and policy, which I'll probably get in a little bit into that a little bit later.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rudy. Latrell.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Latrell Bradshaw. How I got into City Year, so interestingly enough, I served 3 years consecutively, actually, in City Year Detroit specifically. I did 2 years as a core member, which was 2017 and 2018, and then 2019, I served as a team leader. I also eventually ended up working at Bethune Elementary and Middle School, actually, as an ESC parapro, and find my passion really through education, continue to lead into that. And there was a management position open here at City Year, and I was asked to come back. And now I'm here once again at City Year Detroit. I'm currently an impact manager here, working and supporting 5 student success coaches, navigating through their space just like I did when I was a core member. And my passion for education, especially with this topic, is I just really feel like it's important and it's needed. And it's about time that we have this conversation. So I'm ready to go.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for introducing yourselves to everybody. And I'm really looking forward to this. So to get us started, at City Year, we talk about our why, right? Like what drives you to wake up and do what you do every day. So Rudy, I'd like to ask you, what is your why? Like when it comes to your previous work in education, what was it that drove you to wake up every day and do what you do?
So I like to share the story about how I have roots from Montgomery, Alabama. My grandfather was like the first Black, was part of the Black Bricklayers Union. I was vice president there, part of the Civil Rights Movement. So it's in our DNA and our family to give back, right? And so my mother and my father raised us that way. And so, when you start thinking about how you give back, growing up on the east side of Detroit, and you grow up in poverty and you see people, you see kids who struggle, with simple things like, first grade reading, right? You feel like you have an obligation to give back to a community. And one of the things that, I've always believed in, even as a high school student, mentoring and working in a latchkey out in Southfield Public Schools, if you give a kid, you know, the ability to love education, to, you know, the ability to read, nobody will ever take that away from them. Like, you know, once you instill that, that's theirs, you know? And so I always felt like the best way for me to impact my community, you know, coming out of college was to go back to the east side of Detroit and teach kids how to read. You know, and that was my why. You know, this was my way of making sure that my community, you know, could grow, you know, and that kids could see a way out, you know, of a neighborhood that I found my way out of, you know, right? You know, and I found my way out of a neighborhood because I had great parents for sure, but because I had a love for education. You know, I wanted more. I wanted to know how to read. I want to know how to add, you know. I wonder why things worked the way they worked. You know, I wanted my kids to have that same type of, you know, the curiosity that I had growing up. But to have that, man, you gotta have good teachers. You gotta have people in the community who are gonna wrap their arms around you, you know, and provide you with those opportunities to see, you know, things that you'll never get to see beyond your community, right? If you didn't have people that said, hey, I want you to go to this museum with me, you know, or, you know, let's do a science project together and figure out, why does clouds get saturated and then we feel rain? You know, like you want kids to have that type of curiosity, but those are things you have to instill in kids. And so that's kind of how I really found, you know, my calling at that moment was because I wanted to impact my community. And I thought the best way to do it was to teach kids how to love education and have a curiosity that'll take them out of their neighborhood.
Awesome. Yeah, Rui, I think that was so powerful. And I think it's something that a lot of us really needed to hear. And it really kind of gets to the core of showing what a servant's heart is, right? Like being willing to, not just willing to, but understanding the importance of giving back to, the community that you came from, and that the kind of lasting impact that has, and why it is so important. So thank you so much for sharing that. Latrell, so I'd like to ask you, you're somebody who works every day in Detroit schools. As you said, you're an impact manager with City Year, so you are in that space. So as someone who is working in Detroit schools every day, do you see a lack of male teachers of color as a problem? And kind of like why or why not, based on your experiences?
That's an interesting question. That's an interesting one. On one hand, I do. And on the other hand, I do see male teachers of color in our spaces. I'd say, though, that there isn't enough. However, there could definitely be more. Just from my observation and just, firsthand experience and seeing that in our schools. I tend to see it as a problem to where at times, young Black and brown boys also want to see themselves represented. And so by seeing a male teacher of color, it helps put that image in front of them, and it shows them that it's possible to be that too, right? To be, an educator of color. So to see someone who looks like you, being able to spit knowledge and lead a classroom, that stuff goes, that stuff goes a long way. So by not having that representation, I think it decreases those chances of some of our young Black and brown boys of stepping into that space. So I tend to ask myself, like, why is it only 2% of Black men in education? How can that possibly be? I've just been privileged enough to see it, to see that different side of it at Cody High, which where I'm at currently right now. And it's, starting with upper leadership. Like I've been able to see, with our main leading principal, Principal Solomon there, and Principal Tate and Dean Hicks and Dean Porter, being able to see that is definitely been, it's been amazing to see, and even down to the teaching level, but I still feel like it's not enough. I still feel like it's still an issue that needs to be addressed, just the lack thereof. And, but more can definitely be done, I would say, with that. So as of right now, it's still an issue that I see, and that, it all starts with having a conversation as to why that is.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. It's really impactful, and it really sort of touches on kind of the macro level issue, right, that we're seeing. So as someone who's on the ground seeing it every day, I appreciate that insight. And Rudy, I kind of want to come to you and sort of like piggybacking off of what Latrell was saying, right? But it's this macro level issue, and that statistic of slightly less than 2% of teachers are men of color. So, like, with that in mind, I'm curious if what your insight might be in terms of what you think, or why you think rather, the men of color are not considering education as a career path.
I think there's a number of reasons why. I could tell you that, from my personal experience, like I almost didn't become a teacher. Right. There was a lot of conversation in my household, particularly my father, right? When I came home and shared with my father, hey, look, I want to be an elementary school teacher. My dad was like, nah, you're not going to be an elementary school teacher. Like I've seen your test. I know what you're good at. And my dad worked for Michigan Bell at the time, which is now AT&T. So in my dad's mind, my dad wanted me to have a job like the guys that he admired, in his space, which were the mechanical engineers, right? They made a lot of money. They were the ones that moved through the corporation quickly, ascended to be executives. They had the life, according to my dad, who was just, he spliced cables under the ground. That's what my dad did, right? So in his mind, he saw his son, working at the top of the Michigan Bell building, downtown, making a lot of money. So in my father's mind, teachers, that wasn't for my son, right? My son is not going to make a lot of money. He's not going to move, past this middle class, kind of ceiling that we're all at, because my parents were both very middle class. My dad didn't have a college education. My mom did, but she was a paralegal. My dad, again, worked at Michigan Bell. And so we were middle class. When my dad wanted me to be upper middle class, he wanted me to be wealthy. And so I think that, that dynamic exists in a lot of, people's households, conversations, when they're considering, what do I want to do for a living? And is that salary, truly going to sustain the type of lifestyle, that I have, right? So I do think that money is a piece to that. I have a brother who is a principal out in Maryland, in the DC area. So my brother goes back, gets his doctorate degree, right? So now he's Dr. Hobbs. He's probably spends upwards of $60,000 for a doctoral degree. His increase in pay was $1,000 for having a doctoral degree, right? I mean, so, the math for some people just, it doesn't add up right away. Now, my brother's very passionate about education, wants to be a superintendent one day, so he sees a long game, right? But a lot of people aren't, committed to the long game when you have, professions that, like my daughter, who just graduated from Spelman, went to go work for a private commercial real estate firm. Man, she makes $75,000 coming out of college, plus a 15% bonus, right? I mean, so that's more than most assistant principals make, so the money sometimes doesn't add up. So while we're still talking about money, I think even those people who are willing to sacrifice the money, you really think about the attack that teachers have been under, you know, from state legislators, legislatures from around the country, the lack of support that they've received from the federal government, you know, and even your local school board sometimes, right? You know, and so I think the profession doesn't feel supported right now. I think the profession feels as though they're not valued for the work that they do. And I'm not talking about money. I'm really talking about respect at this point, right? You know, that people are coming in to telling teachers, hey, this is what you should teach and this is what you can't teach, right? You know, and I think that's an issue for, you know, young people that are looking to go into a profession, and then they see all these other teachers that are coming out of the profession saying, hey, hands up in the air, I tried, I give up, I can't deal with it anymore. And I'll tell you, you know, being a first-year teacher in the city of Detroit, burnout is real. Burnout is absolutely real. You know, you give a lot in those classrooms to those students. And I mean, when I say a lot, you give your heart, you give your money, you give your time. And so, you know, and at the end of the day, when you're not seeing the results that you want to see, you know, and you're not getting the support that you want to get, you know, from a respect, and then you're not getting paid, and you're watching all the other professionals that you went to college with, right? You know, they're moving up that ladder, that social ladder. They're joining social clubs, fraternities, sororities, and they're doing all kind of things that you wish you can afford, but you can't because you're a teacher, you know, and your money is going other places. And so I think, you know, I say all that to say, right, that there's a number of things that, you know, really kind of prevent people from going into education. And I think that, you know, you could talk about the lack of respect, you could talk about the burnout, but, you know, you all kind of come back to, is it worth it? And worth it is money also.
Yeah. So burnout is real. I just want to repeat that because like somebody else needs to hear that as well, especially in this environment. Like it's real. And also like just in general, I really appreciate that. And so it's so like multi-layered. You know, you really touched on systemic issues, issues around like social mindsets, right? Ingrained social mindsets, the idea of cultural politics coming into play as well. Like just everything that you touched on, as it is so like multi-layered, just very, very important.
Can I just add this one last piece?
Absolutely.
Now, I had my father come and read to my kids once in the classroom. The proudest dad you could ever have in life. You know, like, so, you know, my dad, who really was like all about me being an engineer. But once I had him come in and speak to my class and read to my class and help me out one day, proudest dad you ever want to have.
That's amazing. That's phenomenal. And like, so like bouncing off of that, like to Latrell, I kind of want to come to you quickly and say, you know, through your experience with City Year, what do you feel like you've learned or will be able to share with future male educators of color, right? Like, you know, Reedy was just talking about right now, like his dad coming in. Maybe his dad was not a future male educator of color, but he was able to share that experience with his dad, right? And see like the importance of the work that he was doing. So, you know, you can obviously come at it from like a broad perspective, but what do you feel like you've learned or will be able to share with future male educators of color, or honestly, just people in general?
Yeah. Thanks for that question, Robert. It's a great question, by the way. To be honest, and just to keep it tall, the biggest thing that I personally learned that I can pass off, just be authentically you. You know, I think it's easy to come into this space and feel like you have to conform, right? You feel like you have to kind of conform and kind of get into the typical standard of what we kind of think education is and kind of uphold that. But what we kind of see as time keeps moving forward is that that doesn't necessarily translate well to everybody and doesn't work for everybody. So sometimes I feel like as a Black man coming into the space, or just as a man of color, sometimes you can feel a little bit like an outcast. And I think the reason why that is just because, like I said, sometimes you feel like you have to come into the space and conform and kind of give up, or not necessarily give up, but not be you, and be true to yourself. I can speak to this. I can say that, I've definitely gone through that, like me personally, like I couldn't teach, I couldn't do what I needed to do to the best of my ability, if I wasn't me. And that's just me just keeping it real. If I was trying to be like other people, teaching, I feel like, comes from the heart. And if you aren't putting your heart into what you're doing every single day, you're not putting your heart into your craft, you're not pouring into yourself and staying true to yourself. I just being honest, I feel like you can really come up short and you can lose your way in that. And as just like as a person of color, just like in the world itself, it's easy to do that, right? Because like I said, there's all these standards out there. So, you're all in your thoughts into, what you're doing, if you're not being true to yourself, it's not real. I would say this, I think we all can agree here that for the longest time that education has been pretty, to be frank, education has just been white, like I said, the standards, the curriculum, like I said, it's not how everyone operates. So, I'm not saying just go into these spaces and just do whatever and just be whatever, right? But you still gotta, find out who you are within that space and stay true to that. Students can definitely pick up on that as well too when you're in those spaces and you're not being yourself. And I found like oftentimes students will also call you out on that too, so like I said, you just got to stick to being you, because that's what's important, and that's what's going to make your teaching and your teaching style, the way you operate and the way you run the classroom, like it's going to be just authentically, it's going to be you, right? Chris Emdin, who's the chair in curriculum theory and professor of education at the University of Southern California, and who I've also had the pleasure of meeting last year. He talks about this. He talks about the different ways of teaching and to make it uniquely you. I think it's also how you show up in the school and in the classrooms and in front of your students. And how you present yourself that, can say a lot about you. And, your level of confidence within that space, your cadence and how you speak, that helps with the buy-in with the students in the schools. Students need to see different forms and different ways of educators and education in general. And in turn, what that ends up doing that a lot of people I don't think truly realize is when you are being authentically you, in those spaces, you are giving permission to the students for them to also show up in the spaces, for them to be authentically them as well too. And the way that, and being transparent also in the way that they learn and how they retain information, and how they show up every single day, just from you, as a male of color, as someone of color in general, but especially, as a male of color coming in and you presenting yourself and being you allows the students to also be themselves, and step up and be courageous and be confident to do the same. It's almost like a ripple. It's almost like this ripple effect. You know what I'm saying? It starts with you and it trickles on down to them. And then, their other peers are also seeing them, be themselves and be true to themselves too, which in turn allows them to be themselves. So just look at it like what we like to call here at City Year, a ripple effect. There's a powerful quote by Chris Emdin, and I'll leave it here with this. But he says this, that, students quickly receive, the message that they can only be smart when they are not who they are, right? When they have to kind of conform to what education has been over, long periods of time, or not being able to, show up and be them, right? And sometimes students, are loud. Sometimes teachers are loud. You know what I'm saying? But I look at that as being, passionate about what you're doing, what you're learning, what you're teaching. But not everyone looks at it that way. But when you show up as yourself, that doesn't matter. And so in many ways in a classroom, when you don't feel like you can be yourself, you kind of conform to what I believe Chris Emdin calls it classroom colonialism. And it can only be addressed through a very different approach to teaching and learning, which in turn, if you look at it, showing up and being authentically you, and teaching how you teach and how you best teach. And I think the same applies to any man of color who steps into that teaching space when it comes to teaching, and just staying true to them. So yeah, that's my that's my advice. That's what I want to definitely put out there, is don't feel like you have to step into these spaces and feel like you have to be someone that you're not. That's not the best approach that worked for me. So I would definitely encourage just show up, be you. Because at the end of the day, like there's going to be a lot of buy-in and love from your students when you show up and you be who you are.
Yeah. I think that is such amazing advice, right? Like, be your authentic self, right? Show up as who you are. And I have to say, like, just from my own personal experience, before I, went into the classroom as a teacher, I was like, do I show up as my authentic self? Or do I put on the quote unquote teacher hat and kind of just like show up and do the job, but like leave me outside the walls of the school? And I tried that for a couple of days, literally just a couple of days, before I was like, nah, this ain't it. Because like you said, the kids will pick up on it and the kids will call you out on it. And it's amazing, like how when you choose to show up as your authentic self, how that can impact dynamics of the classroom, which in turn impacts dynamics of the students, both within their education and amongst each other. And it definitely, creates just more of this, a space that is more conducive for what education should be. And that is, truly like learning and experiencing and like addressing things that we all need to address, and not feeling like exclusionary because you're showing up as who you are, and you can just talk about those things in a more real way, which just lends itself better to, to instruction and teaching. Because you alluded to this, and I think it's worth mentioning again. You said just being, really real, that education is white, right? It can be very dominated by that sort of like a white majority mindset. And so showing up as just generally a person of color in that space to really tap into more real lived experiences of your students and how you can utilize that to impact them, is just, I feel that it's crucial. So I appreciate you for alluding to that.
I just don't want to miss that point. I think that's absolute great advice, is to be you. I kind of felt early in my teaching career, particularly when I was an intern, a collaborating teacher at Michigan State, you had to do a whole year of internship, right? So you're literally in another teacher's classroom. And I was in East Lansing, Michigan, predominantly white school district. It was hard to be me. We should acknowledge that it's not always easy to be you, right? Particularly when you're, if you're a city year, fellow core member and you're in a school and you're in somebody else's classroom who has expectations. I mean, it's difficult to be you, right? It may not be as easy. I shouldn't say difficult. It may not be as easy to be you, depending on who you are, right? And so, I will hope that, our fellows are, walking into situations where, that these classroom teachers are ready to receive us and allow, our core members to be us, right? And I'm hoping that teacher programs, these teacher prep programs through Michigan State, University of Michigan, are, now having these conversations because they didn't have them back then. I can tell you that much, but I'm hoping they're having them now, right? To say, allow a young Rudy Hobbs to come in and be him, right? And so I was fortunate. I had a Black principal, Dr. Fry, who would come put her arm around me at the end of the day and say, Rudy, I know there's a cultural gap between you and Miss Runquist, but I'm here to support you. We all going to work through it, but I had a little support, but Dr. Fry wasn't there when that bell rung, right? At the beginning of the day, and when we were having class, and she was like, you can't write on my board until you learn how to write in a straight line, right? I mean, it was like this lady was old school. So, and I was new school, she never thought I'd be a teacher. But I kept in touch with her just so she'll know just how successful, I was in life. But I just want you to acknowledge that sometimes everybody can't be them. And what are we going to do as the individuals that are, that have power, to help them be them? So that's why I will leave that conversation here.
Yeah, no, thank you for adding that. That was very valuable and necessary context. And so I really appreciate you adding that to this conversation. And so, Rudy, I know, you just kind of mentioned that, but I kind of want to ask you another question as well, which can honestly tie into that and really just the conversation we've been having in general, which is from your opinion or your perspective, what do you think are some of the long-term consequences if we ignore teacher diversity in schools? And if you could provide your perspective on that, in Detroit specifically, but also maybe just in general as well. I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
That's a really good question. I think the obvious impact is on the student, right? I think Latrell maybe talked about this in his first question. Identity is a lot. For us to be able to see ourselves in someone else, that means a lot to, I always go back to my first grade days. That's my favorite grade to teach. It meant a lot for those young first graders to see me as a Black man stand before them every single morning, give every student a hug before they walk in the door. That meant a lot. My kids would run through a brick wall for me, right? And it was because I've had the lived experiences though, right? I wasn't always a good student. As a matter of fact, the job I applied for at my old elementary school, the principal literally pulled my file when I went in for an interview. This was it's my elementary school. She pulled my file and literally slid it across the table and was like, boy, I hope you changed. I did not get that job, right? I literally was probably one of the worst students in elementary school. I got kicked out of school all the time. But those are my lived experiences, so when I saw my kids, I gave them grace, right? I understood where they were coming from. And because I understood that there was a connection that I was able to make, with kids that other teachers couldn't make. They didn't have the lived experiences. They didn't have the identity, to really kind of make that connection. And so think about all the kids that have come through my classroom, and was able to see a teacher like Mr. Hobbs, that I can aspire to be that, right? So without having diversity, particularly Black males in the classroom, we're missing all these opportunities to connect, with young Black males, Black people, our students of color. We're missing these opportunities. And when we miss these opportunities, you know, we continue the stat that you laid out, right? 4% of the school districts produce 50% of the non-graduates. We continue that stat continues. It continues to go just as it is when we're not in the classroom and when we're not teaching. We have a better chance of changing that stat when there's a Mr. Hobbs, you know, standing before kids, right? That's one. Two, curriculum, right? When we're talking about curriculum development, I mean, it's important for someone, you know, like me, that look like me, that has my lived experience, you know, to see that curriculum through my lens, right? You know, to really figure out, like, are we really making the connection that we want to make? You know, is our intent and impact lining up? And if it's not, how do we do that? You know, I believe that people that, you know, a Black male teacher, you know, that perspective is important when we're talking about how we're going to deliver curriculum to a kid. And then I will also say the other piece, I wouldn't really call it innovation. I've been really trying to figure out how do I really kind of explain this. But I do think it's about, you know, how we incentivize, how we encourage, how we support, you know, our students. You know, I've always looked at it from a sense of, like, again, you know, I knew I was a knucklehead coming up. I mean, my teachers were definitely surprised that I even became a teacher, right? You know, and so, you know, but with that experience, you know, I embraced those kids that were more like me and was able to kind of meet them where they were at, you know, to kind of make sure that, you know, that my teaching style, my pedagogy, you know, but also, you know, my ability to build this relationship, this bridge, you know, to kids that people weren't building bridges to, right? You know, that those things exist, like, you know, those methods exist. And so I kind of think at it from, like, you know, a few different perspectives. If we weren't there, how this will have long-term effect, student achievement, curriculum, and then just our ability to connect with kids, to support them in everything outside of the classroom and the curriculum. So that's kind of how I think it will have a long-term effect if, you know, if we weren't, you know, if we don't become more present, you know, in these classrooms.
Yeah, amazing. I think that is, I don't have anything that I can really add to that. I think that was honestly the perfect way to address the importance of why we're here today, and kind of a really good way to put an ending point, I guess, for our roundtable discussion. So I really want to give an appreciation to both Rudy and Latrell today for taking the time out of your day to share your thoughts, your opinions, and highlighting some of the challenges that the public school system is facing today. So we have about 10 minutes left for some Q&A for the two of you. Oh, sorry, was there? Oh, sorry, so with the little bit of time that we have left, I wanted to ask a question that came in at one point, and it's sort of to the both of you. So, you know, whoever wants to jump in first or whatever can absolutely do so. So the question is, like, in your opinion, how do you think we can start solving, you know, the issue of educational inequity, or like, how do you think we can start promoting more diversity in the classroom? My question is sort of to both of you, so I'm not sure if, you know, whoever wants to go first.
Go ahead, Latrell. I had the last one.
Hey, I'll go ahead. Rob, can you say that one more time for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in your opinion, who do you think, like, has a responsibility for helping to address the issue of solving education inequity, or promoting diversity in the classroom?
Got you. I'm not going to sit up here and act like I have the best answer or the answer. But I will say that I think some of the onus and responsibility are for the people who are in that space already. Just to continue to be advocates, continue for those to continue to speak up on things that aren't really sitting right with them. So like, people who are making policy, and are really there for change. And Rudy, I just want to commend you for being one of those people that definitely step up and who voices concern, when things aren't, excuse me, shifting and going the way that we want to see, and I think it's also up to part of it's up to the educators as well who are in that space, the ones who are on the front lines, the ones who are in the classroom every single day, and who are giving it their all every single day, to continue saying something, and being that force of change. I think it takes everybody, and I think it takes having conversations like this that we're on right now on this panel, to bring awareness to that and to keep spreading that out there so people can also become aware of it as well. But yeah, that's my answer with it. I wish I had the ultimate knowledge and the ultimate answer with that, but frankly, like I personally don't. But I feel like it starts with those people who already have the boots on the ground, who are doing the legwork, and then those who are in policy who want to see the change happen, to continue fighting for that.
Awesome. Thank you. Rudy, anything to add, or you think Latrell?
I mean, I guess the only thing I would say is that, it has to be a coordinated effort. When you say who's responsible, right? I mean, I think that there's things that the federal government could do to incentivize, people to go into education. I also think there's, policies at the state level, where, we can also incentivize, how we designate what our critical areas are, at the Michigan Department of Education, right? If one of our critical areas just so happen to be that we're missing Black men, and then, hey, that's a critical area, right? I mean, it's critical to education. And so, being able to, wave that flag and make that designation. And when there's a critical area shortage, what you can also see is, additional steps that can be given to someone, incentives for someone to come in, not on the first step, but the third step, which means they get to make a couple dollars on the front end more than they would have made before. And then I think, overall, and this just kind of goes to a little bit of the, one of the questions that's in the chat too, is how we frame education these days, right? Even around our kitchen tables. I have to be honest, and and I'm gonna be very honest in this, in this point, is that when my daughters were coming to me talking about what they want to do, I'll be honest, man, there was a certain relief in my mind when one of my daughters was like, hey, I want to be a lawyer, right? And one daughter said, I want to go into business. And another daughter said, I want to be a doctor. I'm not gonna lie, there was being a legislator and watching people chip away at, the profession, right? And really chomping down the profession. There was, as a dad of 3 girls, there was a certain relief in me. I'm not even gonna lie about that, and I think if I had to unpack that, what I would say is that, I see the lives that teachers are living today, as a former state representative, as a former school board member, and man, it's difficult. It's difficult. And so I think, as a community, I think that we have to kind of start to reassess, how we frame education. And I think that City Year and other nonprofits are in the right spot to really kind of help us do that, right? To help us really kind of, bring attention to how, the policies that are happening at the state level are impacting our ability to provide good teachers, and other advocacy groups. So I think that we're still a long way away from that, particularly here in the state of Michigan. And we're not worse than Florida or Texas, I promise you. But we're not great either, but I think that it will turn around one day. I have hope that our legislators, that our communities will start to prioritize and give teachers the respect that they deserve. And I think teachers are going to get fed up and they're going to start speaking, because teachers haven't really kind of organized to speak, outside of a union yet, right? Teachers haven't really kind of, they don't bust down the state legislator door and say, hey, this is what we need. Teachers are a pretty quiet group outside of their union. And so I think that once, as Fannie Lou Hamer said, once you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, something gonna happen. Some furniture gonna move, and they're gonna make it happen.
That's facts.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And also thank you for keeping it very real. Latrell, were you gonna add something?
No, that was well said. No.
Yeah. I really couldn't even begin to add anything else to that. So thank you for your answer. And also thanks for quickly touching on Russell's question in the chat as well. And again, being very real and honest about your response to that. Latrell, do you want to quickly add your perspective and opinion on what Russell's question was in the chat about potentially motivating your future child if they were interested in education? Just curious about that.
Yeah. I'm with Rudy, on that as well too. Just being honest, there is some apprehension there as well too. I think the biggest thing, I see that's really tough. Because the space that we're in is tough, right? And it's been years and years and years of this kind of baked in, so that makes it so hard. I think I would sit down and have a conversation, just kind of open the space up. I think allowing the opportunity, if let's say my child, boy or girl, wanted to just step into the realm of education, right? I would start by having that conversation, just opening that door. And ultimately, I'm just going to be honest, it's up for that individual to, as they progress and get older, to decide if they want to step through it or not. But I will say this, if they were to step through it, just know that, I'm gonna be there, as a huge support system and as an advocate,
Absolutely.
Especially coming from someone who has experience with it. I think The biggest thing is to continuously be in that person's corner, especially when they look like you. You know what I'm saying? Because you can speak to the experience that you went through. You can speak towards, some of the things that, your child may go through. You know what I mean? But like I said, I'm there to back you up. And when the times and the stuff gets really hard, you come talk to me and we can have a real conversation about it. And the biggest thing I would also say too is just give your all, give a huge effort. Just don't go in there and just try to willy-nilly with it. You're really passionate about it. Be about it. But not to a point where you overexert yourself and overextend yourself to where you ain't got nothing left in the tank. But I would open that door if they were interested. If they express interest, I would support that, that individual going through that process, and just know that I'm there to, just to kind of, catch them, when the moments get real hard.
Awesome. Thank you for also your very real answer surrounding that as well. So for the sake of time, I feel like we could keep this conversation going on for a really, really long time. But for the sake of our time today, I will go ahead and close this out. And I want to give another appreciation to both Latrell and to Rudy for you all taking your time and providing your very wise feedback and opinions today on a very crucial topic that I think we all need to really think about. And to all of the people who attended this event today, I also want to give a shout out and appreciation to you all as well for like joining and listening us and learning more about how we can foster men of color in education. So as we close out, I just want to say that, to bring it sort of back to City Year broadly, that, not only does City Year transform outcomes for students, but also for the people who join our program, themselves. So to, give a little context, our City Year core members, they come from diverse backgrounds themselves. So 2/3 are people of color. So we're, doing what we can to sort of help, address the issue that we're talking about today. But along with that, they're also, united in helping students in the highest need schools that we serve in. So, we are committed to meaningful service, financial support, scholarships, in every way that we possibly can to kind of encourage that participation so that we can give back. So with all of that said, if anybody has any other questions or like more information on anything, please go ahead and feel free to contact me. And I will always be happy to like reach back out, provide what I can, put you in contact with anybody that you may need to get in contact with as well. So again, a final appreciation to everybody who participated and joined us today. And I will go ahead and close this out. Have a great day, everybody.